Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Church Development webinar for September. Our topic today is Inspiring Giving in Non-Donors, Insights from 30 years of experience and over 300 church capital campaigns. And we'll give everyone a little bit of time to log in. So just to cover some background, our agenda for today's webinar will be first, who are the non-donors and how do they think and think differently than the faithful donors? 2, 3 actions that can have a direct and dramatic impact on the non-donors. 3, facilitating a deeper faith journey by including certain things in the Sunday bulletin, as well as a monthly video that can help jumpstart giving in those non-donors. As always, we appreciate you spending this hour with us, and we would love it if you would share our slides with colleagues, friends, anyone who is interested in capital campaigns and stewardship. We're going to record this video. We will send it out to those of you who have signed up, and even to those who signed up but weren't able to make it, they'll get a recording, and then we'll upload it to our YouTube channel as well. So you'll be able to view it on YouTube or on our website. So there are a few places you'll be able to find this if you want to pass it on to a friend. A little background information about church development. It was founded in 1992. Our mission is to increase generosity without fundraising. We've helped raise over $300 million in church capital campaigns and over $800 million in annual stewardship giving to ministries. And how we do that is a little different than other consulting firms. It's based in scripture and 30 years of both research and experience. Our approach is an ask base in prayer and discernment and not in pressure. Typically, we see an increase in weekly giving for 3 years after a campaign. Planned giving program begins after that capital campaign. And if you're interested in finding more, you can email us. You can go to our website. We love hearing from you all. So we'll start with our first presenter, and that will be our founder and CEO, Dennis Green. He's had over 30 years experience, raised over $200 million for over 100 clients. He's a husband, a father, cancer survivor. He is the author of the book, Stewardship System, How to Increase Generosity Without Fundraising. And he has published research on cognitive strategies of consistent innovators, and you can ask him more about that. I cannot fill you in on that. He's also a daily prayer practicer and meditator. And then next up, we have Daryl Prater. He is our guest presenter today. He's also our senior advisor and consultant with church ministry. He's been with church ministry for over 30 years. He's passionate about leading churches to achieve their spiritually focused stewardship goals. I like to think he really walks the walk and talks the talk and takes them through the steps that they need to do, one tiny step at a time. He's a volunteer church choir member and orchestrator, and he is going to share some of his most recent success stories with us. Now, if you've been with us before, you've heard this before, but it's one of our favorites, and we'd like to say it again. Understanding stewardship and how it's different than fundraising. 1 Peter 4:10, like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. And we'll share some other words of wisdom from the Bible today also to get you started. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Green. Dennis, what do you got?
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, that is my favorite scripture. It's kind of funny because it's not just good guidance for one's faith journey, but it's also good career counseling advice. It's also a good way to run your company. Good to Great, the best-selling management book of all time, talks about these 3 questions that guide high-performing companies. And they would never say a spiritual word in a corporate annual report, but they firmly believe in figuring out what you're good at, what your values are, and what the world needs. And that's kind of the core idea of stewardship. What has God blessed you with, and how do God's blessings flow through you? And that mindset is the absolute key to stewardship. Everything that we have is a blessing from God. Now that's a healthy way to lead a life. Another one of my favorite scriptures is that giving kind of opens a doorway. Aldous Huxley would say it opens the door of perception. But in the Old Testament, Proverbs has a different way of introducing the idea. It helps us move from good to great. In Corinthians, you know, we joke about a cheerful giver, but that's really true. I feel really lucky in my 30 plus years career of working for the church. They're definitely cheerful givers, and they're definitely curmudgeons. And I prefer the cheerful givers. Back when I was young, long ago, in my first capital campaign, I had a gentleman introduce himself to me and said, "I'm a tither." And I interrupted. I said, "Well, pardon me. Well, maybe you give so generously that you don't need to give to the capital campaign." He said, "No, on the contrary. I look for things to give to because God has blessed me. I'm constantly looking on how I can serve God." This was a total inspiration to me, like changed my life. I think, wow. He looked at tithing not as a ceiling, but as a floor, as a place of beginning. That mindset is just inspiring. And there's a cognitive psychologist named Seligman who wrote a book called Flourish. And again, very secular approach, but what he discovered was that people who had that attitude of gratitude, flourished. Their level of health was higher. As a matter of fact, there was a study in the book Gift to Live by Gregory Lawson that analyzed the T cell production of people who give 2% of their income or more. And they discovered their immune system was measurably stronger in terms of T cell production, the more generous they were. Isn't that interesting? And we have a lot of churches start their planned giving efforts. And one of the things we discovered in the body of research around that is if a person remembers a nonprofit organization, and we hope their church, in their estate plans, they live an average of 7 years longer than the average person. Isn't that interesting? So a fundraiser would think, daggone it, they're living so long, the church is never going to get that gift through their estate plan. But from the donor, the member's perspective, I think it's that congruence, action and faith that leads to a healthy life. And there's a bunch of scientific secular research on that subject, which I love, needless to say. So the first subject we're going to talk about, and I'm going to ask Daryl to jump in as the Spirit moves him, but I'd like to take this kind of scientific examination of who are the non-donors, how do they act, and statistically, how can we examine their behaviors and therefore facilitate their faith journey, which is really quite a leap. You know, remember St. Augustine said that faith and reason must go together, and that's what we're going to try to do here. Now, I would welcome your jumping in. There's the chat button down at the bottom of your screen. Click and write in your questions or your comments, and Stephanie and Meredith will both help us organize and respond to those as we go. All right, so we're going to come at you with a whole lot of information really fast. Do not be shy about interrupting with questions or concerns or even asking for case studies. Daryl, as you already have figured out, is the talented member of the team here. He is a professional trumpet player and director of orchestral church activities. Daryl, am I right?
Well, you're very, very kind. But yeah, I do volunteer in the music ministry at my home church. And but I also have the privilege of visiting many of the churches in which we serve as church development, to worship with them, to be a part of Mass, whatever denomination or tradition that they have, and also to take note of the various ways that they accomplish stewardship and engage people. So that's kind of an ongoing learning. So I enjoy the volunteering as well as learning from other churches.
Well, I'm glad you're here, Daryl. And
Thank
jump
you.
in. Okay, when the Spirit moves you, jump in. Okay, so
Okay, I will.
So the first topic we're going to talk about is who are non-donors and how do they think of themselves and how do they act and how can we measure them. So this gift range chart is a very standard tool from the secular fundraising world. For decades, I was a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And as Stephanie pointed out earlier, fundraising and stewardship are different. Okay, stewardship is all about God's blessings flowing through us. Fundraising is much more of a hard-hitting marketing activity. Nonetheless, we can learn from the fundraising world, okay? And this is usually how donations flow in. Normally, there's one donor who gives 10%, 10 who give about 4% each. So just from your top 11 donors, it would be normal to raise about half of all the money that is going to come in. We refer to them as your leadership donors. They're very important. They have the same concerns as you or me. They just might have a little bit more financial assets. But their concerns and their ways of thinking are just like your and mine. It would be normal if you had the next strata of donors who would give you about 0.4% of all the funds that were raised each, for a cumulative gift level at that strata of about 40%. So if you've got 1,000 members in your church or 800 members, it would be kind of normal that you would have around 111 that might give you 80 to 90% of all the funds that flow in. That's conceivable. It's conceivable that the bulk of your members would give at $20 per week. Now, I'm not going to use the word magic, but the statistical analysis of giving seems to be there's a comfort zone among people who live in North America that giving $20 a week is a norm. They feel very comfortable whether it's a $20 bill or writing a check or an automatic deduction. That's kind of a normal level of giving. Now, all of us understand a third, a third, and a third in church giving, where a third gives generously, a third gives modestly, and a third gives nothing. And we're going to go with that approximate way of looking at it. Gallup polling has gotten a little bit better insight with the launch of their tool called the ME25, and say the inner third might be just 15%. The middle strata, they think, is pretty close to a third. They think it might be a little closer, a little higher than a third. It might be half your population. And then the outer ring might be a little bit bigger than a third. And so we have a kind of a formidable challenge of a big part of our church membership either puts a dollar in the basket or nothing. And that's a common phenomenon across all denominations, all church sizes, geographic locations. So we can measure that. Now, the interesting thing is people do tend to start at the bottom and work their way up. So this is a predictable stratification of numerical expectations.
So Dennis, I'll walk, if you don't mind, to back up to the last slide.
Sure.
I'm thinking of a church and how they cultivated the gifts, really all the gifts, but specifically the top 11 gifts that you mentioned there. St. Augustine Episcopal Church in Omaha, actually it's Elkhorn on the outside of West Omaha. We did 50 interviews with them, which was a lot of interviews in their feasibility study, as well as a parish-wide paper and online survey. And some of the larger gifts that were a part of this gift pyramid, their specific customized gift pyramid, came in as sort of a pre-pledge if they would give this if the church moved ahead with a capital campaign. And it was to build a new parish hall. Mm-hmm. And then after the feasibility study, the pastor, the rector, Father Ben Barnum, he cultivated those, and I coached him, and he made some personal visits, not for arm twisting or not for special treatment, but just to show some of these donors who had capacity the impact of their giving, and that this capital campaign indeed needed those level of gifts. So I think our model affirms all these different levels of gifts, and it's important for to do an appropriate strategy to make sure all those levels of gifts come in. And I know we're moving into non-donors now, but that's pretty important as we set the stage for doing a capital campaign.
Yeah, Darrell, well, thank you for bringing that up. Next Tuesday, I'm presenting a webinar at the International Catholic Stewardship Council on that exact subject. How does one cultivate leadership gifts? And it's going to be some of this same kind of science involved in that. And the approach is basically, as you said, it's everybody would like that same approach, just to have that relationship to be one of being well-formed and engaged. And it's not rocket science. I wish I could say it was really sophisticated, but it's not. It's engagement. That is the word that is most important. Now, we had a good question pop up in the chat window, and I would encourage you all to ask your questions. What is the correlation between volunteering and giving? It's spectacularly high. As a matter of fact, Fidelity Fund in 2009 did a wide-ranging study on high giving donors, the top strata of donors and their volunteer activities. And what they discovered was people who volunteer give 11 times more than non-volunteers. Okay, that's a multiple of 11, not 11%, a multiple of 11. So should you cultivate volunteerism? Yes. We're going to go into some tremendous detail in just a minute. Now let me shift from this numerical to more kind of the cognitive behaviors of the non-donors. The powers of the human mind to delete, distort, and deny are spectacular. The entire field of economics has been refashioned by a person named Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize for his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I would encourage you to read it. The non-donors think like this: someone else is going to step up. And the worst illusion that they have is the denomination will give our church money. Has anyone ever had that happen, ever? I mean, I believe in miracles, but this is not a miracle that I would believe in. I don't know if this would ever happen. They assume that rich people will step in and just take care of everybody else. And I don't like that way of thinking. You know, we all have been blessed with something, and all of us need to share commensurate with our capacity for giving. And regardless of our wealth or lack thereof, it's the act of the flow, God's blessings coming through us is the most important thing. Now, there is a correlation, going back to the chat question that we just got. If they don't give, they're probably not a volunteer either. They have this Homer Simpson mentality of not me. Now, this is off the subject, but I'll tell you another very interesting correlation. We help every church that we serve in their church capital campaign. We help them start a planned giving effort as well after the capital campaign is over. And we've discovered something phenomenal. When somebody remembers the church in their estate plan, their annual giving increases dramatically. Isn't that interesting? They've made an investment here, and they're going to give more on a weekly basis to make sure that first investment was a good one. Isn't that interesting? So you could say that the non-donor mindset is just a matter of maturity, but it could also be a matter of awareness too. So how do we address that? Okay, so how do we facilitate their spiritual growth? How do we facilitate them changing in their stewardship activities? Well, since we've done so many church capital campaigns, boy, do we keep track of all the statistics of what works and what does not work. So these 4 things, these are the big things. We're going to go through each one in depth. And, you know, we put Lisa Simpson up there. Even though she's the second youngest member of the family, she's the most mature one, okay? And my family is uncannily similar to the Simpsons have portrayed in cartoons. Sometimes I think my oldest daughter is the most mature member of the whole family. But the way non-donors change are 3 behaviors and 1 attitude. And these 3 behaviors they're involved in decision-making. So they own it. They own the decision-making. And just think for your own self. If someone says, you must go do that, it's entirely different than if a question is posed, what do you think we should do? You come up with an answer, and then let us proceed and go forth and do that. The dynamic is very different. So if I own it, I'm going to help implement it, and I'll give money to it. Okay, number two, there's a whole lot of social science research on if my social group, if my peer group, and I always have this mental image of a tapestry with fabric. I am interwoven with people through my church. I have many different relationships. And if my social group is supportive of this, I trust my friends, and I'm going to be supportive of it as well. So I'm going to facilitate those social connections. George Barna, in his research, he's the guy that coined the term church shopping. And the horribly bad news is that denominationalism is dying. People no longer join a church based on dogma. They join primarily on social connections. Doesn't that just blow your mind? And you can look up George Barna, barna.org. He's a prolific writer, and look up the term church shoppers and their criteria. And it's just, churches today are nothing like they were when we were young. It's just the church world is changing so fast before our very eyes. We have to respect this is what church members are looking for. So how can we facilitate those social connections? Number three, the big one, which we mentioned earlier, the correlation between volunteering and giving. If they are responsible for it as a volunteer, that changes everything. That's a conversion experience, and it's okay if it is even a very brief time spent being responsible for something. So, and around Daryl and I call it an episodic volunteer opportunity. The fourth and final reason, and I put it forward because I want to end with it, and it's kind of the most important thing, and it's their faith journey deepening. And when the closer a person gets in their relationship with God, the more likely they are to be generous in their giving. So how do we serve that? How do we facilitate that? And we're going to dig into that. Here I just got a question that's just popped up. Dennis, how did you deepen your faith journey so that you became generous? Well, thank you for asking. And my kids, I tell my kids my story so many times, they kind of fall asleep the moment I start one. But it's kind of my favorite story. In 1979, I took a float trip down the Congo River in Zaire. And we ended up at the Atlantic Ocean, and we pitched our tents just north of the river, and I went for a walk down the beach, and I didn't know it. I walked into a war zone in Angola. It's a small province of Angola called Cabinda that's separated from the body of Angola. And Cabinda has all the oil wealth of Angola. And I walked into a civil war. I didn't know it. And unfortunately, so you're going to have to suspend your disbelief. I want you to imagine me with hair, okay? They used to have brown, curly hair, and I had a beard, and I was very tan, and I was wearing green pants, and I looked like a mercenary, unfortunately. And so these two gentlemen scrambled down a cliff, came across the beach, and held me at gunpoint for 2 hours, convinced I was a mercenary involved in the war, and they were going to execute me. And that was the moment, my first moment of my life where I prayed and meant it. And you would think from a 22-year-old reprobate, the prayer would be, "Dear God, you get me out of this, I promise I'll be good. Let's make a deal." But instead, what came out of me through no control of my own, the prayer was, "Dear God, into your hands I commend my soul." Because I was convinced I was going to die right at that moment. And I shut my eyes waiting for them to blow my head off, and nothing happened. I opened my eyes back up, and I could hear the ocean again and smell the salt air and feel the heat of the sun on my back, and I realized I'm alive. And then the younger of the two gentlemen said, "Allez, va-t'en," which in French means shoot, get on out of here. And I thought, well, maybe they're just telling me to shoot because they're going to shoot me in the back and I'll fall in the ocean and never be heard from again. So I all laid on out of there about as quick as I could allay. And then I started running, and I started zigzagging, running for my life. And I was on the track team in college, so I could run. And I got a couple 100 yards away, and I just was pretty sure I was safe. And I just broke down sobbing, realizing, man, that was a miracle. Then the other miracle came after that, where I no longer wanted to be a reprobate. I think that deliberate choice of choosing a relationship with God changed me. And since that moment, it's been real easy for me to be aware that every breath I take, everything I have, all my relationships are a gift from God. Now, I am not recommending that you send your people on a 5-day float trip down the Congo River to see if they have a near-death experience. Okay, don't do that, okay? Might not work out. But there are steps we can take to deepen a person's faith journey. So let's do these 3 behaviors first, then let's jump into the facilitation of faith journey, okay? Now I'm gonna walk through this and I'm gonna turn over to Daryl, and I'm gonna ask Daryl to tell a story about a success story about something that worked really well. The first one is if an individual owns a decision, they'll help implement it and they will give to it. So there's a couple ways that you could do that. At this point, SurveyMonkey is quite inexpensive and it's quite fast. I think you ought to do 4 surveys per year. I know that's a lot, but I say ask people their input on everything. You could have planning sessions. If people who are interested in a particular issue, like Vacation Bible School during a time of COVID, or planning a Christmas party in the time of COVID, getting somebody involved in a planning session, even if it's just brainstorming, man, they own it. I really like the idea of the pastor calling people on the phone and saying, hey, I want your input. Parish staff calling somebody on the phone. Hey, I want your input. This is just 30 seconds. Give me your input. What do you think? It's relationship building and it's gathering input. And the final one I really like is town hall meetings. You can do this right after church. It takes no time. Half the people might stick around, the other half bolt for the doors immediately, but it doesn't cost anything. Doesn't take any time. It's a dialogue. When they hear the person next to them talking, they now have a relationship with that person. They find out who agrees with them and who's thinking like them. So here are 4 possible options. Now I turn over to Daryl. And Daryl, talk about a success you've had in involving people in decision making.
Great. Well, I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar today. I'm remembering a church that Dennis and I partnered with recently, and they had exemplary decision-making, shared decision-making involvement in their campaign. Holy Trinity Catholic Parish in Lenexa is about a 2,000 family Catholic parish in the Kansas City metro area. They had finished a 3-year debt campaign, which was their second debt campaign and actually 3rd capital campaign in about 10 years. So the feasibility study showed that there was definitely some campaign fatigue, and just the parish was getting kind of wearisome with all the fundraising. But yet they were kind of backed against a wall because they built their beautiful school and church and had to continue to pay off a pretty healthy debt. So as we began the campaign, we involved a lot of people in the decision-making process. One of the key things was that the pastor, Father Mike, was very active in having luncheons with a variety of parishioners just to see how they're doing and to get input. We also had many volunteers on teams, especially the advisory committee, which functioned rather like a board of college board of directors, if you will. We had 50 plus in the attendance of those meetings. And we really began seeing the church have more life. The financial impact of the campaign was dramatic. They had raised $2 million in their previous campaign, which was about 100% of annual income for the church. We did their 3rd debt campaign, and they raised $3.5 million, which was significantly more. You typically don't raise as much as you do subsequent debt campaigns. So that church has paid off their debt now. We felt like we helped them. Our model worked. But I think most importantly, they've received a real shot in the arm, and they are doing great, feeling good that their debt is paid off, and their involvement is up, volunteerism is up, spirit is up, lots of good things happening there. And it was all centered around shared decision-making and involvement.
That's great, Daryl. We just had a question pop up in the chat. Are there specific demographic data that we can draw upon to better understand our non-donors? So there's a macro view and there's a micro view, and this is time to implement the micro view. So please design input opportunities for your non-donors and target the invitations to your non-donors. So your financial management software will tell you who gives and who doesn't give. If they're on the rolls and you have no record of giving, maybe they put a buck in the basket on Sunday, maybe not. But that gives you your mailing list to invite to a town hall meeting exactly like Daryl just described. And how do you do that? Email if you have it. Postcard is the old-fashioned way, but the new way is texting. And we know that 97% of all texts are open within 90 seconds of being received. So first thing you got to do is collect everybody's phone number, and then second, get yourself a software program that allows you to text out. Target those people who don't give and don't volunteer in your community. Have a compelling question. Now, I don't want to denigrate my own gender, but if you send an invitation for a social event, males in general will have a lower response rate than if you send out that same invitation for a social event that has a working component in it. So if you can say to guys, come join us for this working event, we need your input, help us think through this problem, then that fits the definition that many men have of themselves as a shoulder to shoulder, digging with a shovel sort of guy to solve a problem. You will get a higher attendance rate if you define it's not just a session for socialization, it is a working session in which we need your help. You get a much higher attendance rate. So the micro view is do your own analysis, who's not giving, target your invitations to them. And then you can even do a better micro view by saying, what is their age range? And you can look at people who are involved in, who have children in Sunday school who don't give. Invite them to an event with your Sunday school teachers to talk about the year ahead. If you have a group of seniors who are non-donors, invite them and ask the question, how can we better serve our seniors? So this is a time to get super narrow in your analysis. And it works. People love having their opinion asked. Okay, now let's shift gears, all right? The second action that has a dramatic impact on non-donors is engaging their social group. Now, like everything else, we're going to start out with something very simple and move to the more complex, okay? Even though I know donuts are not good for you, please have donuts and coffee after every worship, okay? It gives people an opportunity to mingle and to interact randomly, thereby developing relationships. Dinner's Parade is terrifically deliberate. You've got to organize that as a church, and you've got to invite everybody, and you're lucky if you have a third of your people involved in it. Male, female, parent, special interest groups really, really seem to work. One of the most brilliant pastors I ever met is named Dan Dahlquist in Denver, and he created a study group, this is our next one, for old bald guys who like to go fly fishing. Okay, that's a study group that has a high level of appeal to a very small amount of people. So everybody who was into fly fishing really wanted to sign up for that because that would be a lot of fun. So within that subset of D, you've got to figure out what are your special interest groups, how can you facilitate the creation of groups, and just be ready for a whole lot of failure. So you might offer 50 different things during the course of a year, and 40 of them might tank. Well, that's okay. Doesn't cost you much to generate a lot of options and see who joins. The outcome we want is E. We want people to identify with the group. So who am I as a person? We want one of those components of their identity be, I am part of this church and part of that group. That's how I think of myself. All right, now I'm going to ask Daryl to talk about a success story. And I think this picture comes from Christ Church Anglican.
Oh, yeah.
And one
That's
of
great.
their social organizing by Zoom, which I thought was just sort of brilliant. Do you mind talking about how this worked at Christ Church?
No, that's great. It was our privilege last year about this time to be working with Christ Church Anglican. It's in the Kansas City area. A very vibrant Anglican church. They had needs for a capital campaign to remodel their nave, which is their sanctuary where they have church, their services. and also to put away some seed money for a mission that they had begun in Shawnee. The connections that they had really were organic, the ones that were ongoing, and they were through what they call life groups. Now, some of you who have joined the webinar today may have something like life groups. Sometimes I've heard them called Bible fellowship groups, but it has a social connection. It's a group that you meet with regularly. That was something that they held really near and dear to the ongoing not only discipleship of believers in the church, but a solid prayer group, a solid group that would support each other to identify with. And that really contributed to the vibrancy of the group. Now, we capitalized on that in the capital campaign and did a number of social events. These were not ongoing, but there were opportunities for us to use some of these life groups to present the capital campaign information. And then we brought other groups together, just kind of as your schedule allows. All those social connections made a huge difference in the success, not only of the ongoing church, but of their capital campaign. They went on to raise really a lot of money to go forward for both mission and the Over the Park location. So we're big fans of social connections, ongoing as well as to capital campaigns.
Great, thanks, Daryl. Now, I think Stephanie might have a question for us.
Yes, this is for either Dennis or Daryl. We have a couple of related questions here. Kenneth asked, how is COVID affecting stewardship and how is the church adapting? And then Cindy has a related question. In the world of COVID, it seems like actual gatherings are hard, and especially if they involve food where you can't wear your mask. What other ideas do you have right now?
All right, great. Well, thanks, Stephanie. And keep the questions coming. Well, you know, everybody is thinking the same question. COVID has had an impact. And where we see it hitting hardest is people who have a modest relationship with their church. So if it's a tenuous relationship with ties that are not so strong, it's easy to break those ties. But when the ties that bind us are strong and healthy, like a tapestry, they give more. We're working with a group just north of San Francisco where they had the biggest annual campaign of their entire life as an institution. Right now, it happened in June. Daryl just did an annual campaign at the end of June where it was a spectacular. Do you remember the percentage increase, Daryl?
This was the church in Lee Summit, St. Margaret?
No, Atlanta. The one.
Atlanta. Oh, Atlanta. Yeah, they had an increase of about 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
And the reason that I asked that is that we have a number of churches that have increases. So we have to be specific when we're talking about which one. Just to let you know. So yeah, and that was really through some targeted letters that we sent. We realized that parishioners, members often give when they attend church. So their giving dropped off. And so we sent some targeted letters, made it easy for folks to give online, sent envelopes, and just reminded them how important it is for them to give. The giving really popped back up. They just needed to be reminded and know how easy it was for them to give when they were at home.
Yeah. Now, Daryl, you're skipping over something pretty important. I know you don't want to take credit, but I mean, how many months did you work building up all those committees, the prayer, event, thanks, ambassador, community? You spent months of time engaging all those people. And you just think about it. You engage one volunteer, they're going to have 5 or 10 friends in church. So you might have involved 50 or 60 people, but they're going to, that spread of connection is in the many hundreds of people. So everybody knew somebody who was involved in one of those committees. I think that's a huge thing. And I don't want you to breeze by too fast either. All the work that you put in making giving easier. So it's kind of, we're right in the middle right now of this death of the checkbook. You know, a lot of people are like my son. I got a 30-year-old son in Denver, and he doesn't have a checkbook. It's the dangest thing I've ever seen. It's Venmo, or he has a little bit of cash, you know, he got a debit card. So if we can have an annual campaign that engages people, even if it's like this, if it's a Zoom level of social engagement, which virtually all the engagement you did in preparation for the Our Lady of Lourdes annual campaign was all virtual. I mean, that's incredible. Does it work? Yes, it worked. They had a 15% increase in giving. And this example here from Christ Church, it does work. So our job is to be creative and have many different offerings that meet their needs. Okay, remember Peter Drucker, in his thinking about marketing, he said, good marketing makes selling superfluous. And that kind of applies to us in the church world. If we do a good job of meeting our members' needs, generosity then flows. That's it.
Dennis, I just want to jump in and say that making it easy to give online in your church is so important. The first step is that Dennis and I would encourage you, as soon as you can, just to go to your church website and see how easy or difficult it is to actually make an online gift.
Yeah.
Sometimes that to be able to give online is like tucked down in a drop-down menu, and it's not real easy to find. It's so easy if that's a button on your homepage, and that you can take steps to really make it easier. In fact, if you're not sure how to make it easier, email us. Dennis will have his email address at the end of this presentation, and we can give you some hints and some ideas about how to make it easier. It does take some work, but the benefits are significant.
Yeah, that's really true. That is embarrassingly true. And that also relates to what else resides on your website. And this is leaping ahead to facilitating people's growth spiritually. It's real important that you have a lot of little videos on there about us as a church. So when people are church shopping, they really get to know you. And how do you do that in a time of COVID? You better have a whole bunch of very short videos of your people. And that's leaping ahead. We're going to cover that in a minute. All right, before we do that, let's talk about the third of the three actions that have a dramatic impact on non-donors, okay? And we remember back to the introduction, we talked about the Gallup polling, the Fidelity Fund study in 2009 of high income big donors and their giving patterns. And we discovered those who are active volunteers give 11 times more than those who are not volunteer. So if that's all you knew and you wanted to stimulate generosity among non-donors, what would you do? You'd create a whole bunch of volunteer opportunities for your non-donors, and then you would have targeted invitation. You would figure out who your non-donors are, and then you'd have a targeted invitation to those people to ask them to volunteer. Now, one of the things we have discovered is that they're not interested in serving on a committee. Okay, that's why it's ranked number 4 on that list right in front of you. Only saints serve on committees. Everybody else wants a one and done, or they want a clipboard and count something, or they want to be on a temporary task force, okay? So those of us who serve the church have got to figure out ways for us to make volunteering easy entry point, easy exit point. So when we design a church capital campaign, we create a whole lot of opportunities that we call a temporary, an episodic volunteer opportunity. Might be an hour, might be half an hour, might be 3 meetings, but there's a beginning and an end. It could even be a one and done. One and dones are just fine. The minute they do that, they have connection with human beings and they have a connection with the project. So please be very deliberate on your micro analysis of who is not giving. And once you figured out that group, then design volunteer opportunities that meet their needs, okay? And just think of the ministries that your church does, okay? So some ministries happen on Sunday morning at worship. Some happen Sunday morning with children. Some of them happen in the middle of the week. Some are education. Some are serving seniors. Some are serving other people, like here, this photo you have on the bottom right there. That could be a one and done. I could show up at a food kitchen and just serve for an hour And tends to be a life-changing experience. So design episodic volunteer opportunities for your non-donors. All right, now let me shift. We're almost done.
Dennis,
Go ahead,
Dennis, let me jump in for just 1 second. Thinking outside the box, as Dennis talked about with these episodic volunteerisms, I'm remembering Pine Ridge Presbyterian Church, North Kansas City.
Yeah.
They had a great events team. They did not want to meet. They didn't want to meet. That's just certainly pre-COVID. But they decided, well, we could do a 30-minute weekly lunch meeting if we just did a conference call. So I set up like a 5-way conference call. And they ate their lunch, and we met from 12 to 12:30 for probably 6 weeks in a row. Oh, we accomplished so much, and the non-donor person who was not very active really got involved and then kind of pitched in and actually helped in some events. We've certainly done our share of Zoom meeting episodic volunteerism. We've got an events team right now. They meet every Monday night for 30 minutes. And they've accomplished a lot. We're making plans for their capital campaign. And then sometimes groups like to meet in person, but let's just keep it to 2 or 3 meetings. Well, we can certainly do that. And so the more you accommodate folks thinking outside the box, the more you're going to get volunteers to serve and to be a part of your effort.
Okay, that's great, Daryl. Now, Kenneth asked a really good question. He said, when you do have an increase, what's the reason? Kenneth, there's a 1-word answer: engagement. They were more engaged. We can still engage people in the time of COVID. We just got to be a little bit more creative. Okay, it is engagement. The word that it is not is desperation. Okay, unfortunately, when people are thinking about a donation, they do not want to give to a sinking ship. They do want to give to an organization that reflects their values, that's dynamic, that's healthy, that's going about the business of implementing the gospel. That's who they want to give to. And in particular, I mean, we're all a little bit egocentric. They want to give to activities that they have been involved in. So our challenge is to find ways to involve them. Now think of the leaders of every single one of your ministries. They are always planning for the year ahead. So let's look at your non-donors. Let's invite them to participate in a virtual town hall meeting, planning for adult education in the year ahead. Let's invite them to a town hall meeting, planning for youth activities for the year ahead. Just think of all the things that you could ask people for input on. There are many. So that is the activity that generates enthusiastic generosity. Now, there is a macroeconomic perspective that I just have on my mind all the time, is the average person gives just 1 to 2% of their income to their church. Only 5% of the church-going population actually tithes, okay? That means 95% of us have got room to grow. How do we grow? We grow through engagement. All of us have branded into our consciousness the idea of tithing. Okay, we should never use that word. It's a word that only is comfortable for age people 70 or older. Between the ages of 50 and 70, the word stewardship is an important word. But below the age of 50, those 2 words just are translated into tax for the younger folks. So the next word that's coming up is generosity, and among those who are in their 20s or younger, sharing. Okay, cognitive linguistics is a real thing, and we've got to expect that different generations are going to have different terms for the same exact concept. Okay, but if you say tithing to a 20-year-old, they just think you're going to tax me, and it's very alien to them. Okay, but so let's shift now back to the third of our 3 actions that have a dramatic impact on non-donor: engaging people as volunteers. This one comes from your client in Castle Rock, Colorado, right, Daryl? That has had a smashing success on a debt campaign, and now they're in their annual campaign, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're at. They're finishing up their 3 years of follow-up. They've done just a super job on raising funds to pay off their debt, and their annual stewardship has grown and done very well. I'm remembering, I don't know if you have a picture of this, Dennis, or not, but on the front of their brochure that we did is a picture of hundreds of people, all ages. And it reminds me of how they pitch in and do things together. And they're not a cliquish type church. They're really good at trying to bring in people, to look for people perhaps to bring them in as volunteers, to make them feel at home. Be conscious that they might just want to do a one-off or something to get involved. They're super busy, maybe they travel, but that makes a huge difference in that church. They had many organic groups. Within their capital campaign, they had about 80 to 100 volunteers on 6 different teams, and it's really a privilege to work with them. We hope to work with them again because they've just been so great as a church to work with.
Yeah, they have a pretty fantastic stewardship committee that they call the Board of Stewards. That's brilliant, enthusiastic, hardworking. It helps that they have a pastor, Russ Kane, former male supermodel, comedian, and musician. It helps to have all those things. Okay, but moving on. Let's talk about the ways that change a person's heart related to sharing. Okay, if you can be a facilitator of a person's faith journey, it is reflected in generosity. Our desired outcome is that they grow closer to God. And a parenthetical benefit is that they give more. But we really want to serve the individual member on their faith journey. And I have probably read 40 books on this particular subject. And it turns out that parables are perhaps the most sophisticated scientific concept as a way to facilitate a person's faith journey. Yet truly, Jesus Christ was the most brilliant person who has ever lived in the history of humanity. The parables are brilliant. So what do? We've got to tell a parable every single Sunday bulletin. And the best story is a story about a member of your church who's doing something to serve others. It comes from 1 Peter 4:10. We can all do something to serve humanity in living out the gospel. So tell a story. The story about Sally and her team of taking meals to homebound elderly, or communion to homebound infirm people. Tell a human story. Sally on Thursday took communion and lunch to Susie, who's age 82 and homebound. And here's a quote from both the volunteer and the recipient. And it's heartwarming, but to talk about platitudes does nothing. I'm a fan of statistics. To talk about statistics does nothing to move the heart. It's got to be a story about a human giving of themselves. We're never going to ask for a gift. We're just going to talk about giving, the act of volunteering. Okay? And think about
what you're saying.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. So what you're saying is so very important that folks who are on the webinar to get this, that oftentimes if we just say it's important to give to the church to support the ministries, that's just too generic. But these personal stories that are talking about how a person or persons are invested with their time and talent in a particular ministry, and how that ministry is affecting lives within the church or the parish, that is compelling to give people an opportunity to give. My giving then would affect lives, as opposed to it's a good thing to give to the church. It just makes a significant difference.
Yeah, it's really you as a storyteller. They don't have to be long, sophisticated, just telling a story of here's a person doing a volunteer activity and having a human impact. It's about giving, okay? It's about giving. And if you're really a nerd and you'd like to read some books, there's a researcher now deceased named Anna Wise that actually put EEG machines on people's head and watched their brains move. There's another one, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes, who's an anthropologist. My favorite, though, is the guy that won the Nobel Prize we talked about earlier, Daniel Kahneman, and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So he differentiates between the prefrontal cortex and the subconscious. So it does us no good to present an analytical case that works with such a tiny percent of the population. Stories that represent real human experience, that's what makes the difference. All right, now let's shift to our final point before we wrap it up. From this day forward, I would like to beg you to please do a monthly video that is one volunteer looking at the camera, just telling their story. They can make it on their own phone, and they can do as many takes as they want. And when they're done, you send it out to everybody in the whole church via email, and then put it on your website under the About Us tab. The About Us tab is the second most visited tab on your website. And when people are church shopping, they go there to find out about us. I've been to hundreds and hundreds of church websites, and a lot of them under the About Us have virtually nothing about us, okay? This is a perfect place to put the video about people on their faith journey as it relates to stewardship. So you're going to have volunteers. They're going to answer the same three questions. How has God blessed me? How did God's blessings flow through me? And how did my life change when I realized that God's blessings were supposed to flow through me? Okay? So when I was asked that question, I said, well, one of the ways that God has blessed me is I was pretty good at track as a kid. I love track. I've been in a million track meets, and I'm pretty good working with teenagers. So I volunteered at our elementary school to be the track coach for years. Boring job. Nobody wanted to do it ever. And when I found out, it was enormously satisfying to virtually all of them, whether they had any talent in track or not. They really enjoyed the exploring and finding new ways to jump and run fast or throw a discus or a shot put. It was a blast. It was just the funnest thing. I got a lot out of it. So that's the answer to number two. That's how God's blessings flow through me: time, talent, treasure. And believe it or not, I was willing to give money to that track program because I was so deeply involved in it. So for me personally, it's an easy story. Yeah, Daryl, you got a comment?
Yeah, just really quick, as I know we're getting close to wrapping up. In my home church, mentioned that I sing in a choir. For several years, I've taken a week off in the summer, and I've gone on the youth choir trip, youth mission trip. It's kind of a combined trip where they would sing and then they would do mission work. And so it was an opportunity for me at first to be with my son, who's now 24, but he was growing up, through the youth ministry. And it was an opportunity for me to invest my time and some of my talent of singing in the lives of our present and future leaders. And so I definitely supported that through my time and talent, and I'm sure treasure as well. But that was a really important thing in my life and really blessed me as I was able to give back to God.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, I got one last really fun story. My wife is a volunteer at our church for the class for people who join the church. And it seems like every other year she asks me if I would be a relationship partner to somebody who wants to join. And usually it's a guy about my age who's joining the church. And I, of course, I said, well, heck yeah, it's usually kind of fun. And I make a new friend. And so it's really a win-win thing. And I've been doing it for, 15 years or something like that. Well, recently she asked me, and I said, well, sure. And who you got in mind? Do I know anything about this person? And she says, oh, yeah, I think you know him. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. So I said, well, sign me up. This should be interesting. So just the stories I heard alone from my new Heisman Trophy winning friend was just a total blast. So not everybody's a Heisman Trophy winner, but every single one of the people that I've been involved with in that church joining process, literally, they've become a lifelong friend. I feel like I've gotten so much more out of it than I've given. Okay, so we got to wrap it up because we're bumping up to our time. So these three concepts that we covered today are extremely important. So you have got to figure out, number one, how can we do targeted involvement in decision making? Number two, how can we do targeted invitation to social connecting? How can we do targeted invitation to volunteering, particularly with emphasis on people having an episodic, short-term, easy volunteer experience, easy to get in, easy to get out. And once they go through one, they tend to come back. So these are the big three behavioral action items. And they're very different from the change of heart, our fourth topic of today, which perhaps is more important. How do we facilitate someone deepening their faith journey? And believe it or not, all the research points to a 2,000-year-old concept that supports parables. Storytelling is the best way to facilitate someone in a new discovery on their faith journey. And you already have the best storytellers in the world in your pews, your volunteers. We have a 20-year study from a group of 100 churches in Wichita, Kansas, who just did this one thing. They told stewardship stories once a month. And what we discovered is that their giving increased by double as a percentage of per capita income. So it really was an apples to apples comparison. 20 years is a long time, but we can measure it. We know that it works. So please do these four things. Now we're available to you. We can answer questions. We give away so much of our time. If you want us to talk to your stewardship committee, that's great. We do that every single day. We of course do church capital campaigns. That's how we make money so that we can give away all of our stewardship research. We've served hundreds of churches, all denominations. We've raised a ton of money. I've made a ton of new friends. It's how I met my wife. Consultants usually are worth it, usually raise more money if you do hire a consultant. You can email us or call us with any questions at any time. We got a lot of resources that we will give you. Go to our website, church-development, and we're there for you to give stuff away. You can email us, and you get all these downloadable guides and samples to help you all in virtually every aspect of stewardship and raising funds for your church. Hope you can join us on October 21st. We're going to be looking beyond COVID, and we hope that someday there is a day that is beyond COVID, but we think that might be approaching. So Daryl, any last comments before we break?
No, we hope that, but I just want to say that hope that you would join us for upcoming webinars. We love sharing, and we'll continue doing our God calling out there among churches.
Okay, so please call us anytime, morning, noon, or night, or send us an email. We're here to serve you as we together serve the church. So go forth, good luck, and God bless. Bye-bye.